Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the second part of this series where we are building a notes application from scratch using Angular. In this video, we are going to be setting up our Angular project and creating the user interface. So here is a preview of what the user interface will look like by the end of this tutorial. Alright then, let's get started creating this project and building this user interface. Alright then, okay, so let's start off by going to a folder where we want to create the project. And let's create a folder here, which we will call notes app, notes-app. And then let's go inside that directory. And let's open up a terminal here. I'm going to be using git bash, but you can use command prompt. That's perfectly fine. Okay, and in here we will type in ng-new. And then we'll type in the name of the project, which will be notes-frontend. And here we will add a few flags. So style is equal to SCSS. This is so that we can use the Sass compiler to compile styles that we will write using SCSS. And we need this because we'll be using the BAMA framework, the BAMA CSS framework, which uses Sass. And we need Sass to be able to change the variables. So that's why we are doing that. And also so that we can write styles using SCSS, which I personally prefer to use rather than normal CSS. So the second flag we will add here is routing and set that to true. And actually, let me just zoom in a little bit here so you guys can see a bit better. Okay. And we also want to add the flag skip tests because we don't need the tests in this project. Okay, so press enter, and that would then create this new Angular project. Alright then, okay, so that's good. So now we have the project here. So now let's open this in a text editor, and I personally use Visual Studio Code, but you can use whichever code editor you want. And I'm then going to go to source, and the first thing we want to go and do is go to the styles.scss, and this is because we want to import BAMA, the CSS framework. So before we do that, let's go to the terminal here, and let's first install the BAMA CSS framework using npm install BAMA -- save. And that will just install and save the framework. And once that's been installed, we can go here and type in @import /node modules /BAMA/BAMA.sass. That will import all of the source code for the BAMA CSS framework. Okay, and we also want to go to the source folder and create a new file called main-styles.scss. And in here, we will be changing BAMA variables and adding global styles. Okay? And the first thing we want to do is go to the BAMA documentation. Okay, so go to the documentation and go to customize and go to the with Sass CLI. And the reason for this is because we have some code here that we can just copy and paste. So let's grab this code here, copy that, and let's go to main-styles.scss, paste this in here, and save that, go back to the styles.scss, and we can import that here. So type in @import, and then main-styles.scss. Great, okay, so save that now. And now let's go to the terminal now, and let's type in ng-serve so that this application can be served to the browser. Great, okay, so once the Angular Live Development Server is up and running, we can go to the browser and go to localhost 4200. Great, okay, so we can see that we have BAMA loaded and running because we have the new font that we have imported, and we have the custom colors being used, and we can see this more clearly when we go to main-styles.scss and let's change the background color to red, And let's go back here. And now we have this red background, which looks terrible, but we can now see that it is using those custom styles. So that's good. Let's go back to the code here. Let's just Control Z and undo. There we go. And let's now change these to fit the brand colors of this application. So this is the UI that we want to create here. And we have the pink and blue gradient up here, which creates this purple color that's right in the middle here. And that is the primary color, this purple color. And that's the color that we use for the buttons and also the text of these titles here. And these are the notes, which will be displayed here. And when we hover over these notes, we then get this style here with this gray border, and also we get this delete button shop as well, which is pretty cool. So let's now create the variables for these colors. So let's go back to the main styles.css, and let's actually get rid of these colors here. And let's just keep the purple and pink, and let's add one more here called blue, and this will be set to hashtag 37 C7 F2. Okay, and we will change this pink to FE7 6C2, and the purple, let's change this one to A59 AD7. Okay, there we go. And let's create a few more colors. Okay, so light red, and this will be hashtag FFF3F3, and we'll create the light variable, and this will be used for the light tones in the application. So, for example, the backgrounds and things like that. So let's set this to hashtag FAFCFF. Okay, great. Okay, so now let's set these variables to some variables that BAMA uses for the colors of its elements. So for example, let's go down here and let's set the primary to purple, which it already is, good. The link is pink, but actually let's change this to blue. And let's remove these two properties here, we don't need them. And let's change these because we no longer have brown. And we can keep this the same, that's fine. And we'll set the body background color to light. There we go. And everything else we can pretty much keep the same, but we will add one more property here. Input background color. And this is a variable that BAMA uses, so that is why we are naming it this. And we will set this to the hex code F3F5 FF. FA actually. There we go. Okay. So the reason that we're doing this is because by default BAMA sets the background color of inputs to white, and we don't want that. We want it to have this color here. Okay, so there we go. That's pretty much it for the variables. However, we do want to add a few global styles. So let's go down here and let's set some global styles. Let's just put a comment here. Okay, so let's set HTML and body. So these tags will have the style of height 100%, and let's set the default font size to 20 pixels. To 18 pixels actually, to 18 pixels. And let's make that important. And let's set the overflow to hidden. There we go. So that is all we have to do for now. in the main styles.css. Let's close this, and let's close this as well. And let's go to the app.component.html. And here we have this placeholder content, which we can remove. And let's just leave in the router outlet because we need that for routing. So let's save this now and let's go back to the app. And we just have this white screen. Okay. Let's now go to the routing module, the app-routing.module.ts, and let's set up these routes. But before we do this, let's actually create pages. So let's create a new terminal here, and let's generate a new component for the main notes list page. So type it in here, ng-generate component pages slash, and let's call this component notes list. Okay, press enter, and now we will have this component generated within the pages folder. Great. So now let's go here and let's go to the component HTML, and we see that this default text has been placed here. Great. And now let's go to the app routing module and let's create that path. So path, and the empty string will be the path for this, and let's set the component to the notes list component. There we go. Let's save this now and let's go back to the app, and now we see notes list workshop. That's good. So this means that when we hit the empty path, which basically means the root path with nothing after it, so just slash, then the notes list component will show. Great. Okay, so now let's actually create a component for the main layout of this application. And by main layout, what I mean is, let's look at the UI that we have here, the UI design. So here we have this sort of layout where we have the top bar here, and we have this sort of central column that's here. So this is the layout that we want to create, and we want all of the other components that we create to be nested within this component, this layout component, so that those components take up just this amount of space and only live within this box here. So to do that, we can create a layout component. So let's go back to the terminal and let's generate that. ng-generate component pages slash main layout. Okay, press enter. And now that will generate the main layout component, which is here. Okay, so let's go here now. And we now want to create the markup for this component. So let's remove this for now, and let's start creating this. So the first thing that we want to do is create a main div that will encapsulate this component. So let's create a div with the class of layout box, and let's create a div with the class of top bar. There we go. And inside here we can put in a heading tag, a h1 tag, and let's put in the name of the application, which is called NotesMate. And now let's create a div here with the class of page content, and this is where all of the other components will be injected. So to do that, we will use the router outlet tag. Great. Okay, so let's save this now, and let's go to the routing module. And to make use of this router outlet, we need to have nested components, nested routes. And to do that, we will change this component to the main layout component, and then we will add the children property here and set that to an array of paths. So let's set the path here to the empty path as well. And now let's set the component here to the notes list component. There we go. And now what this will do is it will first look at this path here and set the component to the main layout component. Then look at this path here, which is also empty, which means that the empty path will result in the main layout component having the child of notes.list component. So the notes.list component will be injected into the main layout component via the router outlet. So save this now and let's go back to the app. And now we have the notemate text being shown here, as well as this notes list works text. So this actually means that both components are being shown here, because the notemate is being defined here. So that's this text here. That's within the main layout component.html. And this text here is from the notes list component.html here. So that's pretty cool. So now let's create the styles for these classes. So let's go to the main layout.component.scss, and this is where we will write the styles for that component. So the first thing we want to do is create the layout box class. Let's set this to display flex so that we will be using flexbox for the layout, and let's set the flex direction to column, and then set the height to 100%. Okay, good. We will also set the overflow to hidden, and let's now nest the class definition for the page content. And this is a feature that we are able to use only because of Sass. So that's pretty good. And now let's set this to flex grow 1. Flex grow 1. And this basically means that the page content div will take up all of the remaining space. Okay, and let's set the overflow y to scroll. We are setting the overflow hidden here so that the layout box won't have scroll bars. We are setting the overflow y scroll here on the page content class so that the page content will be able to have a scroll bar and allow the user to scroll the content. We are doing this so that the user can only scroll the page content and not the whole layout box, which also contains the top bar. In practice, what this means is the user can scroll the content but not scroll past the top bar. Hopefully that makes sense, but don't worry because you'll see how this works in a minute. So let's now create the class definition for the top bar. Okay, and now let's set the width of this to 100%, and let's set the height of this to 68 pixels, and let's set the background here to a linear gradient. Let's set the direction of this gradient to right, and let's set the first color to the pink variable that we defined in the main layout.scss. The main styles.scss. The main styles.scss. Here, the pink. So let's use that. Pink. And we also want to use the blue variable. So let's put in blue there. And that's because we want the gradient to go from the right to the left, pink to blue. So that is why we are doing this. So let's save this now. And let's go back to the app. But we get a failed to compile error. And that's because we have an undefined variable pink. That's because we haven't imported the main styles.scss, so we aren't able to use these variables. So let's go to the top of this file here and let's type in @import /// main styles.scss. There we go. Let's save this now and let's go back to the app. And now we have this top bar here with this nice gradient, which is the same as the one in our mockup here. Great. So now let's go back to the styles, and here let's set the display to flex, and let's set the flex shrink property to 0, and this is to prevent the top bar from being squashed or from shrinking. In Flexbox, by default, when one of the flex items grows too much, then the item starts to steal space from other Flexbox items. which then means that those other flexbox items start shrinking. So to prevent that, we have to use the flex shrink property and set it to 0. So that is what we are doing here. Great, okay. So the next thing we want to do is center the child element. So center child element, which will be the heading. So to do this, we have to use the justify content property and set that to center, and also the align items property. There we go. And now let's save this and let's go back to the app. And now this text is now perfectly centered. Okay, so let's go back to the code and let's now nest the styles for the heading. So set the color to white and let's set the font size to 24 pixels. Okay, and there we go. So now we have the heading here, which is nicely styled. Great. And let's go back to the UI mockup, and it looks pretty similar to what we have here. So that's very good. The next thing that we could do is create a container that contains this page content here, and we'll have a maximum width of whatever this width is. But we could just leave this how it is and allow the child components to define their own styles for this width, which is probably preferable when we want to create a maintainable application. So let's do that. Let's not put a restriction on the width here, but instead let this be 100% width and then allow the child components to define their own styles for this layout here. So as you can see here, we have this working layout. We have the top bar here, and we have this scrollable div here for the content. You might not be able to see it, but we do have this scroll bar here. And this means that this content is scrollable. So that's great. We are pretty much finished. However, we do want to add one last thing, which is the box shadow that we have on this top bar here. So let's go back to the code and let's add that. Let's go here and let's add a box shadow property. And let's set this to 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 10 pixels, 0 pixels, and let's set the color here to RGBA, black, and let's set the opacity to 0.15. Okay, let's save this now and let's go back to the app, and we now have this subtle box shadow here. Great, okay, so now that's done. We have successfully completed the layout component. So the next thing that we have to do is go to the notes list component and start creating that. So let's go back to the code and let's close this main layout.component.css and this HTML as well. And let's close this as well. Okay, and let's work on the notes list component. So let's remove this placeholder content here and let's start creating the markup for this page. So the first thing that we want to do is create a div with the class of main container. This will be the main container that is used here, that is centered and has this maximum width property so that we have this one singular column. Alright then, okay, so the next thing we want to add is the search bar container. This will contain the input that we have here, this input here to filter. So to do this, let's actually go to the BAMA documentation again, and let's go to the form controls and go to input, and let's grab some code for the input. We want an input that has a search icon. So here we have some examples of these inputs with font awesome icons. So that's great. Let's go here and let's just copy this. Let's copy this one here actually. This one here. This whole field. Okay. Let's copy this and let's go back here and let's paste it in here. Okay. Let's save this now. And let's go back to the app. Okay, and we now have this big input here. but we don't have that icon showing up here. That's because we haven't imported Font Awesome, and this is using Font Awesome icons. Let's import Font Awesome. Let's go to the browser and let's search for Font Awesome. And let's go to Start, and let's just copy this. Okay, and this has to go to the index.html file. So let's go here and let's just paste that link here, that link tag. There you go. Let's save this now, close this, and let's go back to the app. And we now have this icon showing up here. That's great. So now let's just change that icon to search. Save this now and let's go back to the app. And now we have this search icon here. Great. Okay, so now let's go back to the code and let's change the placeholder to filter. Okay, and let's change the type to text. And that's all we have to do for that. So save that. And now we have this filter showing up here. That's great. So the next thing we want to do is create the styling for this class, the main container class, so that this doesn't take up 100% of the width, but instead is contained within a container which has a maximum width. Okay, so let's go back to the code here. So let's go to the .scss file, the notes-list.component.scss, and let's create the class main container. Okay, and this will be a display flex direction column, and the max width will be 500 pixels. There we go. And let's go back to the app now. And now we can see that this is now contained within the main container, which has a maximum width of 500 pixels. So that's great. But we want this to be centered. So let's go back to the code here and let's set the margin to auto. And that will then center the children elements. So now this is centered. Great. Okay, and now let's set the padding top to 50 pixels. Okay, so now we have some padding up here. That's great. Great, okay, so now let's go back to the notes list. So let's create a new div here with the class of notes list. And in here, we will have the note card components. But we still have to create those. So let's actually create those components now. So let's go to the terminal and create a new component for the note cards, which are these things here. These cards here will be their own component. So let's type in ng-generate components, and this won't be within the pages folder, so we will just type in the name of the component, which will be note card. Press enter. There we go, and now that's been created up here. And now we can actually call that component within this notes list here. So let's use the selector app-note-card. Okay, if you're not sure why we're using this selector here, that is because the selector is defined here. So that's why we use the selector here. Great, okay, so now let's save this now, and let's go back to the app. And now we see that the note card works text comes up here. Great, okay, so that's working. So now let's actually go and create the markup for this note card component. Alright then, okay, so the first thing that we want to do is delete this placeholder content. Okay, and then we want to create a div with the class of note card container. And we want to actually also create a template reference variable for this div. And we do that using the hashtag symbol, then typing the name of the variable, which is container. Okay, so now we can reference this from within our component class, which we will do in a minute. Okay, so let's now create a few more things. So let's now create a div with the class of note card content. Okay, and then inside here we will put in a heading tag h1, and that will have the class of note card title. Okay, and then in here we will put in for now just some placeholder content, lorem ipsum, but later on we will use string interpolation here to dynamically load the title of this card. Okay, so let's put in a div here with the class of note card body. Class is equal to note card body. Okay, and then for now let's just put in some placeholder content as well. This is the body. Okay, and that's pretty much it for now. Let's go into the styles file here. So note-card.component.scss, and let's start defining the classes that we are using here. So note card container, let's just copy that, paste it in here. So dot note card container, and let's start off with this. Okay, and the first thing we can do is set this to have a white background. And we can also set this to have a border radius of 5 pixels. This is so that we get some rounded edges like we do here. These rounded edges that we've got here. Okay, and we can then add the box shadow, which we will set as 0 pixels, 2 pixels, 15 pixels, which is the blur, and 2 pixels, and set the color of this to RGBA, black, and then 0.068 for the opacity value. There we go. So this will be 6.8% transparent. Okay, and just to clarify, this 2 pixels here is referring to the box shadow being 2 pixels to the bottom. So the box shadow has been moved, shifted 2 pixels towards the bottom, and this 15 pixels here is referring to the blur, and this 2 pixels here is the spread value, which means how much larger the box shadow is in comparison to the main div. Okay, and this box shadow is what we need to achieve this shadow effect here. Okay, and the next thing we can do is we can create the class definition for note card content, and we are nesting this because we are using Sass, so that's why we can nest things. Okay, and let's set the padding to 25 pixels, and let's also nest the class definition for note card title. This is the h1 tag that we've got here, class note card title, which is inside of note card content. That is why we can nest like this, like that. Yeah, so note card content, note card title. So in here we will set the font size to 22 pixels and the font weight to bold. And let's actually set the color of this to the purple color, which we defined within the main styles.scss. This purple here. So to use this, we have to first import that file. So let's go to the top of notecard.component.scss and type in @import ///// okay, no, it's /// main styles.scss. There we go. Okay, great. So save this now, and let's actually go to our app and let's see how it looks. Great. Okay, so we get a fairly good card here, and it looks very similar to the card we have here. So that's very good. So we've basically completed the styling for these cards. However, we still have to add the transitions for when we hover over these cards. So let's create those transitions. Let's go back to the code. Alright then, okay, so let's go up here and let's type in and then colon and hover. So this and sign is a SAS operator which allows us to nest the hover styling within this class declaration here. So this means when an element which has this class is being hovered over, then these styles will be applied. Okay, so the first thing we will do is set the cursor to pointer so that the cursor changes to a hand-like symbol. So let's just save this and let's go back to our app, and now we get this hand symbol. So that's good. And let's go back and let's add a few more styles here. Let's set the box shadow and change the box shadow essentially to 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 4 pixels, RGBA, and then black 0.068. So what this does is we change the box shadow property, which we first defined here, to these values here. And we keep the color the same. However, we remove the blur and the offset, and we change the spread to 4 pixels. So what this would do is it will make the box shadow look more like an outline. So let's save this now and let's see how this looks. When we hover over it, then the box shadow changes to this grey outline. We are still using the box shadow property, which means we can animate it. So let's go back to the code here and let's set a transition. So let's go back up to here and set transition box-shadow 0.2 seconds ease out, which is the timing function that we'll be using. Okay, save this now. Let's go back to the app, and now when we hover over it, then we get this nice transition. That's great. One thing that I'd like to do before we continue is just put some margin here so that there's some space in between this search box and the card. So let's do that now. To do this, we can go to the notes list component, and let's go to the notes list class in the styles. Let's actually create the class here. Okay, and let's just set some margin. So margin top 35 pixels. Okay, save that now and close this. Okay, let's go back to the app, and now we have some margin in between there. That's great. Great, okay, so let's go back to the code and let's just close this for now. And let's continue working on the styling for this card. So now we have this hover animation. That's great. But what would be good is if we could have a delete button show up here when we hover over it. And this is actually what we have in our mockup. If we look at the UI design that we have here, we have this card here which has the hover styling applied. And we have this red X that shows up here, which is used to delete the card. So let's create this delete button now. So let's go back to our code. And for this, we actually have to go to the template and create the div which contains that delete button. So let's go here and let's create a div with the class of xButton. Okay, and let's just save this and let's go to the style sheet. And let's start creating the styles for that. So .x-button. Okay, so let's set the position to absolute. Then we will set this button to be 12 pixels from the top. So top 12 pixels and 12 pixels from the right side. So right 12 pixels. There we go. And let's set the height and width of this now. So height 34 pixels and the width 34 pixels. And let's set the background color to light red. And this is a variable that we created within the main styles.scss. And we are able to use this because we've already imported it here. Okay? So the next thing we can do is set the border radius to 4 pixels. Okay, and let's save this now, and let's go back to the application, and let's see if we can see it. So we can't see it here. However, we can see it here. The button is being placed here, which is 12 pixels from the top and 12 pixels from the right. But that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to put the button up here, not up there. So the reason that this is happening is because we have to set position relative on the parent of this. The way to fix this is to set position relative on the parent element that we want this button to be positioned relative to, right? So let's go note card container and set this to position relative. There we go. And now save this, and let's go back to the app. And now we can see that we have this red, this light red box here. So that's working. We can see this more easily if we change this to just red. And there we go. That is more obvious that it's there. So that's now working, and now that's nicely positioned 12 pixels from the right and 12 pixels from the top with a 4 pixels border radius. That's really nice. But we still have to put in that X. So the way that we're going to do this is by using an SVG. The icon that I'm going to be using is a SVG file, which you can download from this GitHub repository. So to download the icon, go to github.com/devstacker/tutorial-project-resources. Okay, so once you're on this page, then we can then click on this folder, notemate-angular. Okay, and inside here, we can find the deleteicon.svg. This is the file that we have to download and import into our Angular project. Okay, so let's click on this deleteicon.svg. Okay, and here we can see that this is the icon over here, like that. So to download this icon, let's go to the raw button here, this raw button here, and let's right click, and then let's go to save link as, and then let's save it. You can save this wherever you want. So let's save it in this folder. Okay, great. So now we have downloaded the deleteicon.svg. So now let's go back to our project and let's import it and then use it inside the delete buttons on the note cards. I've already created a delete icon for this project, and it's just a simple red X. Okay, so I'm going to drag and drop this to our project here, and let's put it within the assets folder. So let's go back here and let's drag and drop it into the assets folder. Okay, and there we go. So we've now successfully got this deleteicon.svg within our application. Okay, so now let's use it here. So let's set the background image to URL and then pass in the string URL. So /assets/deleteicon.svg. There we go. And now let's save this and let's go back to the app. It's hard to see, but we do have that X icon there. So let's go back and let's just change this color back to light red. There we go. Save this and go back. And now we can see that we have this X icon. However, we have repeated versions of it. So to fix that, we can go back to our code here and set the background repeat property, background repeat, and set this to no repeat. Okay, and let's go back, and now we just have one instance of that red X icon. But we want this to be centered, like we have here. So let's go back to the code and set background position and set this to center. There we go. Let's go back, and now this red X icon is perfectly centered. Great, and now that looks very similar to what we have in the UI design. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to show this only on hover, not by default. So let's go back to the code, and let's go, first of all, let's go down here and let's set the opacity to 0, and the button is hidden by default. Okay, and let's scroll up here, and let's go to the and hover statement here, and let's nest a class definition for the X button here, and let's set the opacity to 1. So what this would do is, by default, this button will be hidden because we have this opacity property set to 0. So this won't be visible. However, when the note card container is hovered over, then this class definition here will be applied, which says that the opacity will be 1. Alright then, okay, so let's save this now, and let's go back to the app, and let's see if this works. There we go. So now, this X button is only shown when we hover over this card. That's really great. However, we would like to animate this in so that it's less disorientating for the user. So let's apply a transition to this. So let's go back to the code, and let's scroll down to the X button here, and let's set a transition here. So transition opacity 0.2 seconds, ease out. There we go. So save that, and let's go back to the app, and let's see if this works. And there we go. So that's now fading in. That's great. So there we go. That's pretty good. What I would like to do is set a delay so that this delete button doesn't fade in straight away, but fades in after a short period of time. And this is so that the user doesn't get disorientated with animations, right? Because currently we have both the hover animation of this card and also this fade in here, and that can be kind of confusing and might look a bit messy. So to fix this, we can set a small delay on this X button here. So let's go back to our code here, and let's set a transition delay. So transition delay, and let's set this to 0.35 seconds. There we go, and save this now, and let's go back. Okay, and let's hover over here, and now this fades in after 0.35 seconds, which to me looks a lot better. However, we do have the problem of when we hover out, the transition is delayed so that this X button stays visible for too long. So when we leave this card, then that button takes too long to fade away. So to fix this, we can actually remove this from here and set the transition delay only when we are hovering over the note card container. So let's set the transition delay here. Okay, save this now, and let's see if this fixes it. Okay, so that still works. And that works as well. That's really good. So there we go, this works really nicely. The next thing that we can do is add some hover effects to this delete button, because currently this button doesn't really look interactive because there's no change of color, background color, or anything. So let's go back to the code, and let's go back down to here, and let's add a hover. Okay, so here, let's set the background color to darken, which is a SAS function, which takes in a color value, such as light red, and we have to put in a percentage here. So let's say 2% or 3%. Okay, let's save this now, and let's go back to the app, and let's go here, and let's hover over the delete button, and now the background color changes. That's great. So now this looks interactive. That's great. So now let's go back here. Let's also create some styles for when we click on the button. So let's use the active styles here, and let's set the background color to darken, light red, and let's set this to 5%. There we go. So let's save this now, and let's go back to the app, and let's try this. Okay, so that's darkened when we hover over it, and now let's click on it, and now it's slightly darker. Okay, so let's just go back to the code, and let's adjust these values. So let's change this to 2% and this to 4%, and that should look a bit better. So let's save this now, and let's go back here, and now that changes slightly, and when we click on it, then that changes a bit more as well. Okay, there we go. So that looks a bit more balanced. Great. One other thing that we could do is also make this zoom in when it's animating in, to make this look a bit nicer. So to do this, we could actually go back here and set the scale. So use transform scale 0.35. Okay, and let's look at it now. So now it's small, and when we hover over the note card container, then here we will set transform scale 1. There we go. And let's go back to the app, and now we can't really see it, but this does start at scale 0.35 and then go to scale 1. So let's now add the transition for this. So let's go back down to here, and let's go to the transition property, and let's set the transform to transition in 0.2 seconds with the ease out function. There we go. So save this, and let's go back to the app, and now let's see what happens. Now it zooms in as well, and that looks a bit more interesting. There we go, that looks pretty good. Great, so the next thing that I want to do is see what happens when we have lots of text in this card. So let's go back to the code, and let's go to the note card component.html, and let's go here, and let's just copy and paste this a lot of times. So alright then, okay, so save this now, and let's go back here, and now we have a lot of text here, but we don't want this because this is just too big. So let's look at the UI design that we have here. Here we have a card which has lots of text, but has a fade out section here, which I call fade out truncation, because it's truncating the text by fading it out. So this is the kind of effect that we want. So the next thing that we want to do is create a gradient overlay here to create this effect. So let's go back to the code, and so let's go to the note card body div here, and let's actually delete this text here for now, and let's press enter, and let's actually create a paragraph tag, and this will be for the body text, and we want to create a div with the class of fade out truncation. this will be the gradient overlay that allows us to achieve that fade out truncation effect. Great, okay, so let's save this now, and let's go to the style sheet, and let's go up to the note card content class here, and let's create a new class nested inside of it called note card body, and let's set this as position relative, and let's set the maximum height, and let's set this to 80 pixels, and let's set the overflow to hidden. So this is the maximum height before it is truncated. Okay. And now let's create a nested class for fade out truncation. And for this, let's set the position to absolute. And let's set bottom to 0, height to 50%, and let's set width to 100%, and let's set the background for now to red, just so that we can see whether or not it's working. So save this now, and let's go back to the app, and that's great. So we can see that we have this red bar here, which is 50% of the height of the body text area. Great. So let's actually go back to the template, and let's put a lot of text in here. So let's just copy and paste this a lot of times. There we go. And save this, and let's go back to the app. And now we have lots of text here, and this looks like it's about 50% of the height. So that's working really well. So let's go back here to the style sheet, and let's change this to a linear gradient. And the direction will be to bottom, and the first value here will be RGBA white 0, and this will be at 0% of the gradient, so right at the start. And the second color will be RGBA white 0.8, so 80% opacity, and this will be at 50% of the progress of the gradient, so halfway. And then the third color will be white, so pure white with no transparency at all. Okay, and then that will be at 100%. Okay, so save that now, and let's go back to the app. And now we have this nice fade out truncation effect here. There we go. That looks pretty good now. That's very good. And that looks very similar to what we have here. So that's very good. So the next thing we can do is style this text here. So let's just set the color of the text to #555. Save that, and let's go back. And that looks a little bit more subtle. The UI looks a bit more balanced. That's good. And that's actually the same color that we are using in the UI design. So that's good. So that looks great now, but we do have one issue with this gradient that we created here. And that's actually that we can't select the text here because the gradient is in the way. So we can select the text up here, but not when the gradient is overlaid on this text here. And that's because we have to set pointer events to none. So let's go to the fade out truncation class here, and let's set pointer events to none. Okay, save that, and let's go back to the app. And now we should be able to select this text. See, there we go. So now we can select this text even though there is a gradient overlay. So there we go. So that's very good now. Let's try and create multiple cards now. So let's go to the notes list component .html, and let's create multiple of these cards. Okay, let's save this now and let's go back to the app. And now we have 3 cards. And you can see that we have a problem here. And that's because these have no spacing. So let's set some margin. So let's go back to the code and let's go to the notes list class. So let's go to the style sheet here. Let's create some styles for the app-note-card selector. So let's set margin bottom to 25 pixels. There we go. Let's save this now and let's go back to the app. And nothing's happening. And this is because we have to set this to display block. Okay, save this now and let's go back. And now we have 25 pixels of margin in between these cards, which is great. Okay, so that's working out really nicely. Alright then, okay, so let's go back to the code and let's go back to the note card component.html and let's remove this note card body text and let's just replace it with some normal text, some short text. So this is a test 123. Save this and go back to the app, and here we can see that we have a big problem, and that is that we still have this fade out truncation happening even when we don't have an overflow. So this isn't good. We only want the truncation to appear when we have an overflow. We need some way of working out when there is an overflow, and when there is, then conditionally showing the truncator. And so we can do this using JavaScript or TypeScript. So let's go back to our code here and let's add a template reference variable to this div here, and let's call this truncator, and let's save this and go to the component class and let's use viewChild @viewChild and make sure you import that from @AngularCore, and let's now type in the template reference variable. So truncator, and let's call this truncator, and let's set this to an element reference, which is of type HTML elements. Okay, there we go, and that has to be imported from @AngularCore as well, up there. Okay, and now let's go to the ngOnInit method, and in here we want to work out whether or not if there is a text overflow, and if so, show the truncator. Alternatively, we could do the opposite and work out if there is a text overflow, and if not, then hide the truncator. And this might actually be easier. So let's do this. So let's first of all get the style of the body text. Before we do this, let's actually go back to the template and set a template reference variable for this body text here. So let's set a template variable here and set this to body text. Okay, save that and go back to the component class. And let's do the same thing as we did with the truncator and use viewChild to grab that. Okay, there we go. And let's set this style to window.getComputedStyle. This.bodyText.nativeElement. And let's just set this to null. Okay, and let's set the viewable height and that's equal to pass int style.getPropertyValue, and then the property name is height, and the radix here is 10, so base 10. Okay, and then we will create an if statement here that checks whether or not this dot body text dot native element dot scroll height is greater than viewable height. Okay, so if there is no text overflow, show the fade out truncator, this dot renderer, and this we have to inject, so private renderer, which is of type renderer2. Okay, that has to be imported from @AngularCore as well. So this dot renderer dot set style, this dot truncator dot native element, and then we have to pass in the style, so display, and the value, which will be block. Okay, and then else, then this dot renderer dot set style, this dot truncator dot native element, display, and then the value will be none. So then else, there is a text overflow, hide the fade out truncator, and this should actually say if there is a text overflow. So when there is a text overflow, then we set the style of the truncator to display block so that this is visible, right? So we're showing the fade out truncator here, but hiding it when there is no text overflow. So let's save this now, and let's go back to the app. And now we don't have the fade out truncator, which is very good. So let's go back and let's go to the template, and let's put in a lot of text here, and let's see what happens. Alright, so save this now, and let's go back to the app. And there we go. So now we do have the fade out gradient, which is very good because we do have an overflow. That's really, really good. Let's try that again. Let's just go back here and put some short text in here. And we don't have this gradient here. That's really good. So that works really well. So now we have successfully created the styles for these card components. The last thing we have to do here is make these values for the title and the body dynamic. So that is the next thing that we are going to be doing. So let's go back to the code, and let's go to the component class, and let's use the @input decorator here to define a input for this component. So @input, and that has to be imported from @AngularCore, and the name of this input will be title, and this will have a property name of title and a type of string, and the same thing for the body, so body, and the variable name will also be body, and that's of type string, and there we go. However, we can actually clean this up and remove these values here, because the name of the binding property name here and the property name are the same. So to clean up this code, we can remove these here. Okay, so let's save this now, and let's go to the template again, and let's remove this hard-coded text here for the body, and let's use string interpolation to show the body text. Okay, there we go. And let's do the same thing for the title. Okay, there we go. So save this now, and let's go back to our app. And now we have no text within these cards. That's because we haven't passed in data to these components. So let's go back to the code and let's go to the notes list, component.html. And here we have to set the title and the body using property binding. So let's set the title using property binding, so using square brackets here, title, and set that equal to a string. So this means that we have to use quotes within the speech marks. So put in quotes here and then set this to testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, and let's do the same thing for the body. Okay, so pass in a string which has to be encapsulated with single quotes. There we go. And then type in some dummy text here as well. Testing, testing, testing. This is the body. Okay, let's save this now. Let's go back to the app. And now we have the values showing up here, which is great. That's really cool. Okay, so let's go back to the code here. Okay, and let me just explain why we have to encapsulate these strings with single quotes. Because it may seem weird why we have the speech marks and also have these single quotes. This is because when using property binding with square brackets, Angular is expecting an expression or a property name, which it can then get from the component class. So for example, you could set this title property to card title, which would then be referencing the card title property in the component class of notes list. However, when using strings, like normal strings and not properties, we have to then tell Angular that this is a string, not a property name. So that's why we have to encapsulate this in single quotes. So to quickly demonstrate this, we can go to the component class and just quickly create a property here called card title and set this to ABC and save this and save the template as well and go to the app, and here we have the text ABC. So this was retrieved from the property called card title. But what if we didn't want to show the contents of the card title property, but instead show the string card title, the literal string card title? Well, then we would have to encapsulate this with single quotes, like so, and save this now, and let's go back to the app, and now this shows card title. So that's why we have to use single quotes when we want to pass in literal strings. However, this does look a bit awkward with the speech marks and the single quotes. So Angular provides us with a shorthand way of doing things, and that's by removing these single quotes and by removing these square brackets. And this is now exactly the same as what we had before when we were passing in the string using these single quotes when using the square bracket notation. So if we remove those and remove these single quotes and save this, then we can go back and we still have card title, the literal string card title. So that works pretty well, and that's very good to know. So let's go back to the code and let's go here and let's remove the square brackets from the body property, and let's remove these single quotes as well. Okay, there we go. Let's save this and let's go back to the app, and now this works very nicely. We can also go and remove this property here because we don't need it. Okay, there we go, save that, and that's very good. So now we have a completely dynamic note card, which is really, really good. The next thing we want to do is we want to create the note details page, which will allow the user to view and edit the note fields. This is what it will look like. So we have a input for the note title, and we have a text area for the note body. Alright then, so let's get started building this note details page.